David, I didn't know you were such a fan of poetry. I know that I've tried to encourage you to engage with poetry in the past. The idea that you've come at this is surprising.
No, you're right. I'm mostly a prose and academic works kind of guy. So your own familiarity with particularly medieval literature has always intimidated me.
The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people and organisations who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in your world in 2026, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members. If you want to join those wonderful supporters of our podcast and financially support our show so we can continue to produce great episodes each week, then we encourage you to click on the link in the show notes and subscribe to the Patreon of Socially Democratic. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a Tuesday morning on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and it's the end of March. And that means it's time for another Feeney Files with Jessie McCrone. And to help me unpack the month that was in Australian politics, I'm joined by the former campaign director for the Labor Party in Victoria and South Australia, and a National Assistant Secretary of the Labor Party and a Member of Parliament, David Feeney. Welcome back to the show.
Woohoo! Nice to be back.
And she's a former Deputy Chief of Staff and a former National Secretariat Organiser for the Australian Labor Party, former Field Director for the Victorian Labor. I'm just going to go through all of your CVs. She's now Managing Partner.
Former areas.
I'm trying to bring into more campaign stuff this week because we're very much talking about campaigns.
I get the message. I used to be someone. I appreciate it.
Beef up both your bona fides. But now as a Managing Partner at Foster, McCrone, Ratcliffe and Sims. Jessie McCrone, hello. Lots of things to talk about this week. Obviously, let's talk about what happened on the weekend. The South Australian community of voters participated in the Festival of Democracy and had their state election. It was a huge win for Peter Malinauskas and the South Australian branch of the Labor Party. Congrats to all those involved. Just a quick summary of the results itself. Labor picked up 32 seats. Had a swing against them on its primary of 2.3%, so it had a primary of 37.7%. This is 65% of the votes counted so far, so still more votes to be counted. But One Nation had a swing of 19.6% to them on their primaries, taking their primary up to 22.1%. They jagged one seat. And the Liberal Party had a 16.7% swing against them on their primary, taking them to 19% primary. They've picked up 4 seats. Others had a swing against them of just under 2 points. They're 10.9% primary. Others actually is higher than the Green primary. They've picked up 2 seats. David, as a former campaign director of the South Australian branch of the Labor Party, particularly over you were the campaign director in the party's previous biggest electorate and victory, were you proud to see your efforts being surpassed on Saturday night?
Another Feeney record confined to the dustbin of history. It was wonderful, wasn't it? And as you say, the biggest victory for the Labor Party in the history of South Australia, 32 seats, just incredible. And I feel like because of the novelty of One Nation's arrival on the scene in such force and with such numbers, the magnitude of the Labor victory has been somewhat lost in the coverage. This was a stunning re-election of the Premier and an enormous tribute to him. I don't know whether viewers were lucky enough to see his victory speech on election night, but I think it was perhaps the finest victory speech I've ever heard in politics, which is truly saying something. I thought he really captured the moment, and he captured the mood and the demeanour and the zeitgeist of the moment, and really immediately took on the mantle of leading his state and his party, and indeed many more of us, through the challenge of what one nation represents. When he talked about patriotism, and he used the poetry of Lawson. So a magnificent effort all round, and hats off to him. Hats off to Eamon Burke. I did think to myself, as we were kind of absorbing the destruction of the Liberal Party in real time, that we are blessed not only with the fact that South Australia is led by such an outstanding Labor leader, but that it happened in a state where the Labor Party has such an excellent branch operation. The South Australian branch has the wit and the talent to really assess this, extract the meanings, find out what happened, and then help the rest of us work out what the lessons are. So we are in fine repair in South Australia, and thank goodness for that, because we will need their counsel nationally as we think about what to do about one nation.
I think I'm interested in hearing both of your reflections on what this means for Victoria, particularly because that's the next poll up. But before we do turn our attention to that, Jessie, you and I watched the results coming in from the comfort of our own home on Saturday night.
Some of us more sobers than others.
Yeah, I had an old schoolboy's lunch. So I came in hot, and even though, so we're recording the South Australian recap tomorrow, and so I thought I'll be very conscientious and I'll take notes on a Saturday night. I went back to read them on Sunday morning. Frontier gibberish. None of it makes sense. Anyway, so Jessie, please tell me what happened on Saturday night.
So first of all, I am surprised, David, I didn't know you were such a fan of poetry. I know that I've tried to encourage you to engage with poetry in the past. The idea that you've come at this is surprising.
No, you're right. I'm mostly a prose and academic works kind of guy. So your own familiarity with particularly medieval literature has always intimidated me. And really, that was something in Mally's speech for you, wasn't it? A little bit.
It really was. It really was.
You would have been familiar with the piece, of course.
I said it, like Stephen won't remember this, I said it along with him, obviously, in a very similar cadence.
I did, before you go, Jessie, I did turn to you, I do remember this, I did turn to you and say, is he going to read the whole poem? Oh, yeah, no, he's going to read the whole poem. Yep, he's doing all of it, not even just like a quote, not the whole damn thing.
Yeah, so Stephen may have impacted the specialness of the moment for me. That's probably fair. So I know you're doing a whole podcast on breaking down the results, Stephen, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. I echo everything David said. It's a phenomenal result in South Australia, and I think that South Australia has long been a branch that has, we say this, punched above its weight, but it has turned out phenomenal campaigners, phenomenal candidates, and excellent premiers. I think if you look at the photo of the candidates that are coming in having won, even if you take Mally out, like this caucus is 20% more attractive than any other caucus around the country. It's phenomenal. Like I don't know how the South Australian branch have been so selective in their candidates. They've even been able to pick people who are pretty hot. And
you're not just talking Parliament hot here. You're talking actual hot.
No, I'm talking about like genuinely good-looking people. It's amazing. But to speak to the way that South Australia campaigns, I am particularly drawn to the fact that they pick and stick. They pick seats that they want to win. They double down in them. They send the resources there. They are not consistently polling these seats and trying to work out whether we should keep them on the target seat list. And I think that strategy works. You see it pay off in South Australia. They spend the money and the resources in campaigning instead of testing over and over again whether we've moved a little bit of percent in this seat that we want to win anyway. So if we decide it's on the target seat list, let's just double down on the target seats list. So I've always respected that about South Australia, and I think that it again paid off. They had good candidates in very early, and I think the results, so even holding the Seal of Black, which we won in the by-election, I think it shows a phenomenal kind of approach to community campaigning that could be replicated in other states.
Just to add another compliment to the show, watching the ABC coverage, the Labor Party represented by Tom Koutsantonis, the Lion of Labor. I can't believe Tom is now the father of the house in South Australia. That makes me feel so old. But I'll just get my Zimmer frame here. a masterclass in how to handle yourself on election night. He was utterly brilliant, and he finished the coverage with a wonderful line. Well, I would trust Peter Malinauskas with my children, and tonight the people of South Australia decided they would too. I mean, he had zingers, he had us in tears, he had us in laughter, what is it? He had another one there. It's like trying to pick a broken nose.
Yeah, he actually prosecuted the policy debate as well. Like he was able to defend the economic record, talk about how they were reprofiling projects, all the while giving genuine insight. But also, I remember reflecting when it was declared that he was the father of the house, news to me as well. I'm like, well, doesn't this just speak to the efficiency of the South Australian operation? That Coots is kind of the oldest there. They are moving people through and getting generations.
And was turned into an elder statesman, from a young rabble-rouser to the elder statesman.
There's hope for us all.
Yes, that's right.
Brilliant.
Let's turn our attention to the implications for Victoria. And I want to break it down into what are the implications for the Liberal Party first, and then talk about what are the implications for Labor. And I've ordered it in that way intentionally because I think actually there are bigger implications for the Liberal Party, and that's probably not a story that's coming out in certainly our own local media here in Victoria. But, my initial reflections were that the Victorian Liberals and the leader of the hard right faction, which is Bev MacArthur, and all the Conservatives in the caucus will be looking at that South Australian result. In particular, they'll be looking at this young, first-term, rookie, moderate woman leader in Ashenherne that ran on a centre-right platform and saw their primary vote get absolutely gutted by One Nation. And the Victorian Libs will be now looking at their own young, first-term, rookie, moderate woman leader in Jess Wilson and be demanding that she takes the Victorian Liberals on this political journey into Genghis Khan territory. And I'm interested to see whether or not in this moment we'll see that this strategy of papering over structural and ideological canyons of divide within the Victorian Liberals can simply be resolved by picking a different leader if that worked, because I think there's going to be a lot of pressure now on Jess Wilson to try and keep the show together, because up until this point she's done a reasonably good job, I think, but there's going to be genuine pressure on her. To you, Jessie, what are your thoughts about the implications that this result will have for the Victorian Liberals?
I think you're correct. I think that there will be people knocking on Bev MacArthur's door like this week saying it's time to push the agenda that we actually want to push, and I think it's going to be challenging. I wouldn't say it hasn't got any coverage in Victoria. Avid listener of yours, Tony Barry, has written a story in The Guardian that goes to this question about whether the Liberals will decide to push hard right to deal with the One Nation problem. He has been advocating for the party to push and actually face One Nation head on, which I genuinely think is their best and only strategy. You don't hug a cobra that's trying to choke you. But I think when you look at the way that Jess Wilson is performing, and those of you who haven't watched the Commonwealth Games video they put out, it is genuinely good. It is a good, engaging video that prosecutes a message and demonstrates their party can be in the same room, sort of, because part of the caucus filmed it separately to the others. And I'm not entirely sure whether John Pizzuto was told to wear athletic gear or whether he genuinely throws discus in jeans. But if you look at that as a sort of metaphor of an example of kind of how they're managing this run for government, it's a good message. It is grounded in grievance, and there is no, and this is what we're going to do about it. And I think that Jess has been somewhat hamstrung by the fact that her party is riven, that she hasn't been able to go out and make big policy announcements. At this point in 2014, the Labor opposition had made significant announcements around jobs and transport and really set the agenda for what they wanted to prosecute as the alternative. And I think that as long as the Victorian Liberals keep complaining, which is part of opposition, I'm not judging them for that, but if they keep complaining without an alternative, I don't see how they're going to catch the voters and why they don't just move straight past them to One Nation. Because without a solution, I don't see that now they are the only thing left, which previously they may have been. So I suspect part of the reason she hasn't made a big policy push is there is not unity in the party to do so.
Before I go to you, David, yes, you are right. Tony Barry did write a very good piece in The Guardian this week. And Tony, this cross the airwaves love-in that seems to be forming between this show and Tony on the ABC. I appreciate the shout-out on ABC. That's great. Any kind of publicity is good publicity, so God bless you, comrade. David, what are you making of the implications this will have for the Tories in Victoria?
Yeah, very significant, I think. One of the things we need to do when we look at these contests is be quite, clear-eyed about what is particular to South Australia and what isn't. And as the dust settles, we can't have a conclusive view about that. But we do know that the Liberal Party in South Australia had a couple of things going against it that are not quite so severe here. Their former leader being done for cocaine possession and use, going to jail. They had two former Liberals convicted of crimes. The Liberals in South Australia were in a very awkward position of trying to run a campaign saying don't vote independent when all the independents were former Liberals. They couldn't run a law and order campaign given that the most significant breaches of the law in the parliament were coming from their own party room. So they were a humiliated and spent bunch themselves. And so that has to be borne in mind. But, there is that golden rule, isn't there, that one nation will only do very well when the coalition does very badly. It's a bit like the Greens will only do very well when Labor does very badly. Bad times for Labor usually means good times for the Greens and coincidentally good times for Conservatives. So as we think about this in Victoria, I think one nation is coming. Pauline Hanson announced it on election night in South Australia. They have demonstrated in the South Australian campaign that they have money, resources and some political wit. They're building a political operation which presumably they will just pick up and plant in Victoria from South Australia, and it grows as it travels. So they're coming. We know they're coming. We should not be underestimating how effective they're going to be. Who are they going to appeal to? Well, the lesson out of South Australia is that they've really got two audiences. The most significant of those by far are people who vote Liberal and who have lost faith in the Liberal Party. And we know that there are swathes of them in Victoria because no matter how serious Labor's predicament has been in this state, the Liberals' primary vote has never wildly surged, and support for the Liberal Party in this state is still very tepid. And this is, that we've got teal uprisings, we've got a Liberal leader who's sitting inside a teal vulnerable seat, being told to lead her party to the right, and that will constrain her policy manoeuvre. So the most diabolical part of the One Nation threat is certainly going to be against the Liberal parties and national parties in the regions. But there's another audience, isn't there, and that is low income, low education, predominantly born in Australia white voters in outer suburbs. We saw that in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, and we know that there are audiences like that across Western and Northern metropolitan Melbourne. We saw those audiences move away from Labor at the last state election. They just never did it in the numbers that harvested a loss of seats for Labor. So we lost margin, but we didn't lose seats in those places. And I think, and we all noticed that, and the state government noticed that, and so that, and then we had the Werribee by-election just to remind us of that phenomena. So there's another swathe of places out there that One Nation will target, and where they might expect to find some audiences. But it's not simple because there's large numbers of people out there who are low education, low income, not born in Australia, who are not going to be flocking to a One Nation standard with the same level of enthusiasm. The other interesting phenomena is that once those sort of rebels in the West and the North put on One Nation garb and build themselves around that brand, they gain things but they lose things. And one of the things they will lose is the capacity to rally preferences from a miscellany of groups who they might otherwise depend on. In South Australia, we're going to see several Liberals re-elected to their parliament on Labor and Green preferences against One Nations who topped the ballot. We've got some by-elections in the United Kingdom that tell us this story as well. Voters in large numbers will rally to the candidate they think can most effectively stop a One Nation candidate. And so that will lead to some, potentially interesting things going on around Metro Melbourne in the next state election as candidates sort of form anti-One Nation blocks. And voters will force them to do that whether they like it or not, because there'll be lots of voters who are determined to stop One Nation winning.
Yeah.
So lots of lessons, lots of impacts. It's a threat to Labor. It's a threat to Labor losing an election. It's a threat to the Liberal Party existing at all. And that's the scale of it. I mean, on Saturday night in Adelaide, we looked at a new, fresh-faced Liberal leader who everyone said had performed very well, very impressive, in a room full of Liberals who were celebrating the fact that they had 4 seats. Mm. And they were, there are nearly now as many Liberals in Adelaide as panda bears. So, when you're on the cusp of extinction, it's unusual to have a big smile on your face. This is life or death for the Liberals. It's important to us too.
Jessie, David segued into the implications for Labor in Victoria. Thoughts?
Yeah, look, I'd particularly like to pick up his point on the multicultural communities, and they are communities that Labor has worked with for a very long time. I would certainly encourage our Labor caucus members who listen to continue that engagement. I think that there are MPs that are particularly good at it. I think someone like Pauline Richards in Cranbourne does a phenomenal job of ensuring that she's engaging with all of her electorate, but she I don't know that she should be as worried as others when it comes to the move of One Nation, mostly because of her own work that she's put in. So, there are implications for Labor here in Victoria, and I'm not going to suggest that there aren't. I do think that the outcome is worse for the Liberal Party. I do think that strategically it puts them in a much stronger bind than Labor, and I do think that there are significant opportunities for us to exploit when it comes to the election versus the existential existence of the Labor Party. I think that there's a real question about tactics that come out of it. Usually those of you who are interested in the operation of the Democracy Empowerment Unit would know that when a candidate nominations close, that is often when you go to the effort of ensuring the community understands the background of the kind of people that they are voting for. I think that there is a question with One Nation whether that work shouldn't be done before nominations close. It is not the same as when the Liberal Party at the centre has to disavow a candidate that's on the ballot paper. I just think One Nation have demonstrated they're far less inclined to do that. So there are some tactical questions there.
They seem to get blamed less too, don't you think, Jessie?
They do.
People forgive them, they're new, they're only just starting out, this is their first election, they're taking on the Uniparty.
And they're normal. And we all have a few skeletons in our closet. They're not these polished politicians that Labor and Lib gives us. No, absolutely. So there has to be some thought given to that. And while I am seriously impressed with the South Australian electoral operation, I do think Victoria has historically nailed the Democracy Empowerment Unit to a level that other states should envy. The second question I have is just around doing some work with those multicultural communities and ensuring that there is not a mood to move to One Nation. I think that it was interesting in the New South Wales election that when Latham was the leader, he talked a lot about how many people from the Indian diaspora he had on his ticket to kind of defend against that attack. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I also...
An anti-Islamic line of policy pursuit from One Nation will find some sympathetic ears inside Indian communities.
and some other multicultural.
Oh, of course, plenty of others. But I'm just saying, you shouldn't. No one out there should imagine
not a block.
that just because you're new to Australia doesn't mean you're going to automatically have an affinity with every other new community.
Exactly. So there is some tactical and strategic decision making to happen there, and some question about boldness of policy offering. I think that if it is correct, the One Nation voters are kind of like, the system's so broken and so working against me, I'm prepared to put it into some sort of garbage disposal and see what comes out the other side, which is kind of my view on a little bit of what happened in America. The swamp needed to be drained, and I don't care if the guy that's doing it is a criminal. It may call for bold policy announcements that show that you're prepared to really have a crack at the system as well. So there are a bunch of things that you can look at and take out of it. I still think better outcome for the Labor Party than the Libs.
And if I can sort of back in both your reflections there, and also just sort of remind folks, and I'm about to become demographic Dave here, but the first thing to say is that Adelaide and its outer suburbs do look different to Melbourne and Sydney in our outer suburbs. They're smaller in population, so the densities of particular groupings is much, much smaller. It's one of the reasons why the Greens have never won a seat. They don't have the density of Green voters in, say, the actual seat of Adelaide, which would be a natural place where you'd think that they would win. It's less cosmopolitan in population than Melbourne, and it's in South Australia, it's predominantly white, whereas Melbourne's equivalent seats in the outer suburbs are far more multicultural, to the point that you both just made. And from speaking to folks on the ground in Adelaide that were campaigning in those sort of northern suburb seats, you're right, Jessie, it was the economic challenges that those constituencies were feeling, the feeling of isolation and being left behind, and not about migration that saw this shift for some to vote One Nation. But I think the point still stands that One Nation, has a terrible brand amongst broad migrant communities that historically have got a home with Labor. And I think it would be wise for Victorian Labor, starting today, to start pushing contrast campaign content into the seats where there is a decent, culturally and linguistically diverse voter, and reminding those folks exactly who Pauline Hanson is, what she stands for, and what they think of them, notwithstanding the points that David just made there about
the voters of Box Hill.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I'll even name them, Steve Sakos, I'll name them for you, because I actually did research and found out which ones have got more than at least 45% of non-English speaking backgrounds in voting populations. Cranbourne, Clarinda, Narre Warren, both of them. Mulgrave, Pakenham, that's just the southeast, Box Hill, Glen Waverley, Ringwood, Burwood in the east, Footscray, Tarney, Cororoy, Broadmeadows, Greenvale, Point Cook, Werribee and Calico in the west and north. That's just a start on that particular issue. I'm not saying that we're going to put all our eggs in the basket of just trashing One Nation, but to your point, Jessie, let's not leave it till it's too late, and let's start now making sure that those people are locked into voting for Labor, because it's become so much harder for either the Tories or One Nation to take those seats off us when we've got a rump of voters that are absolutely locked in and not wandering away thinking, geez, I might go vote for someone else right now.
Well, and just one other reason why you're right. It's also important, I think, for us to cement in voters' minds the fact that the best way to stop One Nation is to vote Labor, and that your local Labor candidate is the one most likely to stop One Nation. Yeah. Voting for the Liberal isn't as good. Voting for an independent isn't as good. You have to vote Labor to stop One Nation.
Because I'm sure we'll run some sort of complicated preference argument to convince a disengaged voter of that.
Well, in the United Kingdom, the British Labor Party has lost the mantle of being the party best placed to stop reform.
Yeah.
And in Manchester, they voted Green. In Caerphilly, they voted for the Welsh Nationalists. So when you lose that mantle, voters will just tactically vote for somebody else because they want to stop what they perceive as the most objectionable candidate.
Can I just make one more reflection, Stephen, on the impact it'll have in Victoria and nationally, which is the press galleries will start changing their behaviour when it comes to One Nation, and how they change behaviour is a little bit incumbent upon our press ex on both levels of government. talking to them about the fact that these people got real votes. This is not a polling blip. And I would say the Liberal Party also need to be making this point. So the question is, how are they responding to that, and how much are they prepared to actually shine a light on some of the things that One Nation actually stand for?
Let's turn our attention to news that came out of
optimism that came from that, Stephen.
No, I've got a whole bunch of other thoughts on that actually, but we'll be talking about this more, I feel, in 2026 as we get closer to November. Speaking of November, last week there was speculation borne out in the Victorian state media of unrest inside the Victorian Labor caucus and questioning the viability of the Premier to lead Labor to victory in the lead up to the November state poll. For those of you that are outside of Victoria, there were rumours in the media that ran in the papers and in all the TVs of a potential challenge from Ben Carroll, who's from the right wing of the Labor Party, or from the Premier's own Socialist Left faction, Gabrielle Williams. Party rules are pretty clear on how you can replace a leader that doesn't want to resign. It has to go to a vote of both the caucus and all members of the Victorian branch of the Labor Party. Jessie, how serious do you think this challenge is?
Well, I can tell you who really does want it, and that's the Herald Sun, because they commissioned a poll after the first story came out. It was on the front page today. They commissioned the eminent polling company Freshwater, known for such things as the outcome of the Liberal Party's federal result at the last election. They've jammed up this poll being like, who do you think's best to sort of lead the Labor Party? And then declared Ben Carroll and Gab the winners, even though, like, all credit to them, but like most of the voters didn't know who they were, which was kind of the outcome of the poll. So the Herald Sun has, from what I can tell, be calling a lot of caucus members, trying to put to them different things that they can and can't confirm that they have no evidence of. Like, we hear ministers are cancelling meetings to go to a faction meeting that's happening. And someone will say, well, that's just not happening. And they're like, okay, I'll call someone else. So that's not to say that this thing is entirely fabricated, but I do think the Herald Sun are very excited about it. And I, again, have the view that if the Herald Sun want the Labor Party to do something, perhaps it's not in the best interests of the Labor Party. I don't think that this is totally bogus reporting, though. I think that last week some of the things that were reported are true. I think that it was interesting that a lot of the reporting, though, indicated that a lot of these discussions are not happening in the caucus. They are people outside the caucus having these discussions.
Like who?
David, they didn't report who, Stephen. It said
former Labor MPs. Who are they? Who do you think they are?
Did it give them that descriptor? I don't remember.
It did.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that they're talking about former Labor state MPs. Is that your question? I think that some of these former Labor MPs that have been not named have certainly been using those quotes for some months in the Labor Party, and there is no question about who they are, because the same thing has been repeated on background in the newspaper.
So they're not covering their tracks very well.
I don't think they care. Yeah. I think that.
Speaking as a former Labor MP, I feel like I have to defend the honour of my category. When I saw this speculation, I was reminded of a very important adage that every Labor Party person should always remember, never forget, and that is that News Limited is always barracking for the next Labor leader. They will always support people who are in the business of tearing down the leaders of now. And as soon as that person becomes the leader, News Limited will start working on them. I have lost count of the number of Labor leaders and aspirants I've talked to who think they've genuinely got the enthusiasm of News Limited, and their little hearts break when they come into office and discover that actually News Limited are always just in favour of the next one. And News Limited are consistent. They're always in favour of the next one because they want the Labor Party to always be suffering, always be in a condition of some tumult internally. So no one for a moment should imagine that News Limited enthusiasm is anything other than a long-standing strategy of doing harm to the Labor Party. But, of course, it wasn't just a News Limited story. No. And as Jessie said, there was obviously some fire where there was smoke. But the fire wasn't very courageous, was it? Because within 24 hours, there was a caravan of Labor figures, including both of those who'd been nominated as potential challengers, coming out saying that they completely supported the Premier. So if there are people outside the caucus who are trying to make something happen, they might have cruelled their own chances by forcing their aspirants to face the cameras long before they're ready. But the thing that struck me about this cunning conspiracy, this masterful effort, was that they came out not only with a pair of candidates. Often a challenge has one candidate, but this one decided it needed two. And one from the left, one from the right, hadn't quite agreed on which one was running and which one was running as deputy. So there's some issues at the launch pad, which they obviously need to be working through. But the thing that most struck me was not the fact that they didn't have a clear aspirant or ticket. The thing that struck me was they had a policy manifesto. And their policy manifesto, and I can't remember whether it was the ABC or News Limited that had this policy manifesto, but the policy manifesto I think is worth a moment of our consideration, isn't it? Because the policy manifesto is a rolled gold suicide note. And let's just remind ourselves about the suicide note. The suicide note is that a new leader, upon arriving in Spring Street, would immediately do two things. They would call a royal commission into the CFMEU and they would cancel the SRL. And in this way, they would find the funding for a whole lot of other things. Now, it's possible, if one was a conspiracy theorist, and I'm not, it's possible to imagine that an aspirant is running around cabinet offering to fund a whole bunch of pet projects by killing the SRL and in that way galvanising some support. That's possible, but I don't know if that's happening. But let me just briefly touch upon why this is such a spectacularly stupid thing to do. Firstly, to slay a premier and in the immediate aftermath of that slaying call a royal commission into the CFMEU puts a giant scandal corruption tag around the whole Labor government. You just turned the CFMEU and construction corruption story, which spans Australia, into a Melbourne-centred catastrophe that the Labor Party owns and must wear. Mm-hmm. So well done. And in case anyone in Victoria wasn't following it or hadn't heard of it, they are now. So well done. So the next Labor leader has just set themselves up as the successor to Joh Bjelke-Petersen, haven't they? They've just they've arranged the scandal-ridden catastrophe of their party and their former leader, and they've got 5 minutes of sunlight to enjoy before they get cast into the abyss.
Can I just add to that? Both of the leadership aspirants as named, and as you've said, ruled it out, would be called to that commission. They have both been ministers for this portfolio.
It's possible that News Limited gave the aspirant this idea because what a cracking little Catherine Wheel of news stories that's going to be between now and November, eh? I mean, it writes itself. News Limited's got 20 or 30 front pages already sorted, hasn't it? So there's that cracking idea. And then the cancelling the SRL, well, you know, I mean, we talked before about how the Liberal leader and the team did that Instagram around the Commonwealth Games, which I thought was funny and effective and did give them the every appearance of being a team. Well, the message in that, of course, was attacking Labor's cancellation of the Commonwealth Games. Well, this new leadership conspiracy's got a much better one than cancelling the Commonwealth Games, hasn't it? It's got cancelling the SRL. So, you know, East-West link, Commonwealth Games, SRL. I mean, all the next. I mean, how does this policy manifesto propel the next Labor leader into anything other than unmitigated catastrophe day after day, week after week between now and November? So if there is a conspiracy underway, my appeal to them is get some new policy people, because at the moment you might have an argument that you can carry through certain parts of the backbench, but I promise you, if you turn up trying to get this Labor government re-elected with that as your plan, you're dead on arrival.
And if any caucus member is being promised baubles that could be bought out of the money for SRL, ask the person that's selling you that to explain exactly in the budgetary settings how that would work, given a lot of the things that the caucus members want is output, this is capital. There is a lot of budgetary reasons why that can't actually happen. So I'd want it well explained to me if that was the reason I was switching my vote.
And, of course, the SRL is now a project that federal Labor has thrown its shoulder behind.
And Infrastructure Australia, David, has named it a priority for the country.
Very good,
So
Jesse.
I thought that was all pretty entertaining. And this is what happens when, you let News Limited get into the cockpit. They start flying you into strange places.
And just to add to that point, David, changing leaders, you've got to start building a whole Premier's office with brand new staff because most of those people won't stick around. You've got to reintroduce yourself to the electorate. No one knows who these people are. And now you can't run on a campaign narrative of stability in times of uncertainty because you've just chopped and changed your leader. And if there's one thing that we've learned over the last 10 years of the Liberal Party infighting and navel-gazing and talking about themselves and not the concerns of voters, is it's a sure way to get belted at the polls. So there are lessons to be learned from our opponents as well.
And I don't want to underestimate the challenge coming in November. Like, everyone is going to have to work very hard, and everyone should be working very hard as an election year. It is challenging for a government to ask for 16 years. I don't think an old government is solved by a new leader, though.
We have a new leader. Her name is Jacinta Allan. She's doing a great job. Okay, there was where I'm conscious of time as well, but where there was a thought piece written by former Assistant Secretary of the Victorian Labor Party, my former colleague when I was at head office, Kos Samaras. We talked about it last week on the mailbag, but Jessie, you were the one who actually read it and then felt
it was sent to me.
I felt the need to respond to it, and we put up a post on our social media thingos to which it got a lot of traction, not a lot of likes, but a lot of shares. To which I say, leave a comment, you cowards. You all agree with it, but you don't want to put your name to it. Anyway, nonetheless, Jessie, I want to give you an opportunity to sort of write a reply, not write a reply, but just to sort of flesh out your thoughts about what you read in terms of what Kos had to say about your previous time in working for the Andrews government. Now,
and to be clear, he didn't specify who he was talking about. So
you was in the royal you.
Yeah, okay. All of us that were in the Labor operation before 2022, which I think is broadly how he's outlined it. Look, I don't think the article is completely without merit. There are elements of it that I think are worth examining. I think the thing that I find frustrating about it, and I know that on the podcast with Lissy and Todd, you went through a bit of the policy response to it and why this wasn't the strategy of the Victorian Labor government to entirely ignore the kind of voters that Kos is talking about, which I don't want to necessarily add to that. I must admit, I did find it a little ridiculous that this knowledge was being handed over cloaked in the language of Piketty, and how consultants and the intellectual elite are the problem. Yeah, as I said, cloaking the criticism in a bunch of French philosophers, as well as responding to part of it in...
because he wants all of you inner city wankers to read it.
I don't think that's it, because I can tell you what, I'm not reading the essay. What is that? The quarterly essay, which is another place that he has put it. So I would just say that the irony of that is not lost on me. I think. What do I think? I think that the challenge that Labor has with what is considered this romantic version of working class voters is real. However, I also think we shouldn't disregard the types of voters who are voting for us they are in some way less morally virtuous as a supporter base. I think that the article is somewhat dismissive of the fact that Labor's whole reason for being is for people to aspire beyond the means of their parents. That is the Labor project as I see it, that people are right to be aspirational, that working class people want to get out of the working class. And I think that the idea that project becoming successful is in some way a shameful outcome of the Labor Party I don't accept it, and I don't think it's reasonable. David's shaking his head.
I am.
Mr. Feeney, your reflections on the piece?
I thought it was an excellent piece, and I've told Kos as much. I think to some extent, Jessie, you're strawmanning arguments that that the author wasn't making. I don't think that he's trying to cast or denigrate any particular class of voter, but I think he is doing what we all need to do, which is trying to search for answers about how the progressive side of politics is losing working class voters across the Western world. And why is it that the siren song of right-wing populists has been so seductive in the United States and the United Kingdom and, as we saw on the weekend, in South Australia? And I mean, he might have been dismissive of the Brahmin Left in the sense that he was dismissive of certain leaders, but he's not dismissive, I don't think, of those who voted for them. I think the point he's trying to make here is that, if you don't like the culture wars, that doesn't matter because the culture wars are coming for you, and that right-wing populists have developed an appeal which goes to the economic aspirations of the working class, and the Labor Party has increasingly forgotten that language as we moved to different categories of grievance and identity politics. We are not lost, but we need to be vigilant, and we need to make sure that, in fact, we understand our core purpose is economic justice.
And aspiration.
And achieving economic justice and recognising the legitimacy of aspiration, and not be sidetracked, as so many others have been, by culture wars and identity politics, which is what's smashed the left elsewhere.
He has literally said triangulating the old class politics out of existence, replacing solidarity with aspiration, as though the idea of aspiration is in some way morally repugnant.
Yeah, well, as I say, that's not how I read it. I thought the way I read it was, in some ways, him bemoaning the fact that for too many, the issues of justice are now entirely around issues of identity and immutable characteristics, and not around issues of economic justice and access to opportunity. And that if we get back to that core message, we find our voice.
Well, then we come back to the fact that he's criticising the state Labor government as being the example of that.
I think,
no, but he does. He has a whole section on that.
I think he says that. We talked earlier in this conversation about how at the last state election we lost a lot of voters across the northern and western suburbs. He's noticed that. We noticed that. I think he's wrong to think he's the only one who saw it. But that's, I think, what he is talking about. And I think he's saying that the next election where we're going to watch this train is Victoria. It's coming here next. And it is.
Well, no, I would argue that this article suggests has already arrived. It arrived in 2022. He's also suggesting that Victorian Labor government, who, can I just be very clear, did free TAFE, which is entirely and squarely at these voters, as well as the big build, which is entirely and squarely, like, it employs a lot of the people he's talking about.
Yes. And the state government embraced a whole lot of crazy woke shit too. The story is more complicated, and I think his concerns are more complicated.
I would say the Victorian government had the capacity to speak to more than one group of voters.
We don't need to be utterly defensive of everything Victorian Labor has done. We are constantly about building ourselves. You're only as good as your next election.
What I am not being dismissive of the article, as I opened with. There are elements of this that I agree with, and I think that these things should be examined. What I don't like is the consistent rewrapping of the history of the Labor government in Victoria to Kos's ideological preferences, which he does often, and I don't think is a reasonable criticism of the Victorian Labor government before 2022.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of his ideological preferences are a nice fit with mine, which is perhaps why I find myself so
My final thoughts since my frigging podcast, so I'm going to end this topic with myself. I also disagree, David. I think Victorian Labor has not peddled in grievance or identity politics. I don't think that's what voters know that this government is about. I think quite the opposite. I think this government has been so electorally successful because it's a government of seeing that it's getting things done for as many Victorians as it humanly possibly can. And the proof is in the pudding in some of the things that Jessie's just mentioned. Plus, the amount of schools that have been built out in the areas that Kos is saying that voters are feeling disenfranchised with is serious investment. Is it enough? No, it's a growing area. That's what Lizzie was talking about last week. But we've built a coalition of voters and found new voters as well, and in particular new parts of the economy. Women. Women are a new part of the economy, and they weren't a part of that old economy that Kos is talking about. And one of the reasons why we've been so electorally successful is because a vast majority of women are now voting for Labor in Victoria. And I think we are a model of a social democratic party. And I actually think that the demographics of the southeast are eerily similar to the demographics of the north and west. Yet Labor continues to do better in the southeast than the north and the west. And I don't know why, but it's just a case. And I just think it's wrong to just keep on looking at the north and the west and saying the problem is that the Labor Party doesn't know how to speak to those communities because of this obsession with grievance and identity politics. And I think there's more to it. You said, David, it's very complex and there's more to it than that. And I think campaigning and persuasion is one of them. And I just think that as I said, I agree with broadly what Kos is saying, but when it comes to what's going on in Victorian Labor and what the government has done over the last couple of terms, I can't get around it. I just can't. I think it's wrong. Anyway, there's my filibuster. Let's segue to another filibuster. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I guess maybe apropos of that last conversation, I wanted to touch upon an issue that struck me with when the latest round of conflict in Iran began, and that was people rushing to talk about international law. Because I have found this conversation in the pages of our newspapers and and amongst television commentators more often than not deeply frustrating. I'm reminded of a remark that Allan made in 2018 when he said the order we have known for the past 70 years has ended. It's not being challenged. It's not changing. It's over. The international order has been transforming now for some years. And when one reflects on international law, it's possible to say, well, international law did not protect Ukraine from invasion. International law did not protect demonstrators in Iran from being murdered by their own government. International law has not prevented nuclear proliferation by the Iranians and indeed by others. Utopian ideas around international law having a responsibility to protect unfortunately died in the war in Libya, a conflict where the responsibility to protect meant that the United Nations Security Council approved a no-flow zone in Libya, but it was then felt by Russia and others that was abused by the West to effect regime change against Gaddafi or to facilitate regime change against Gaddafi. And, of course, this brings to light the fact that for a lot of people and for a lot of commentators, a war is only ever justified or morally virtuous if it is approved by the UN. And, of course, no conflict will ever be approved by the UN if it can be and will be vetoed by one of the permanent members of the Security Council. And that obviously includes China and Russia. So those factors are enormously important when one looks at the landscape and thinks, gosh, why can't we just fall into the arms of international jurisprudence here and sort of take out some kind of injunction on the mullahs acquiring nuclear weapons. Why does it come to war? But there's another factor here too, and that is that in recent years, in my view, we have seen the language of international law weaponised, distorted and mutated by a progressive left over the war in Gaza to the point that they have bleached for in international law of all of its meaning and power by talking about a fake genocide claim in Gaza, by talking about a fake famine in Gaza, by the UN having its institutional obsession with the state of Israel. The whole apparatus and language of international law has been cruelled. And so for the left and others to now pick it up and critique the war in Iran using the language of international law, they find themselves talking a language that has lost its power and lost its lure. Because international law has been wrecked by its failings, institutional and systemic, and by its abuses, by the fact that it's been weaponised and politicised. International law is not seen to be, and is not, some kind of independent and neutral power that judges. It is instead something that states have used to prosecute their causes and their arguments. And of course, what brings that into sharp relief is the fact that when there's talk about the rules of war, it seems like the rules of war only ever apply to the West. There's no marches in the street about Iran murdering tens of thousands of its own people when they demonstrate. There's no uproar across the West around the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the awful bombing of civilians that takes place day in, day out across Ukraine. It seems that the rules of war are only applied to Western powers. And so we have this blundering Philistine, President Trump, flouting the rules of war because and he's able to say, I think, credibly, I am not going to be constrained by a set of rules that apply to no one but me. Why should the United States be constrained in how it wields its power when no other is? Cluster munitions treaties apply to the United States and Western powers, but they're ignored completely by everyone else. And yet these sorts of treaties and non-proliferation agreements remain sacred. So we live in an ugly world where the international legal system is, it's not changing, it's not being challenged, it's over. We are now in a world where might is right, and there's nothing to be celebrated in that. But as you look at that, as everyone looks at that and bemoans its reality, let's not forget that all of those who manufactured these absurd and oversized claims against Israel can themselves take a small bow for having killed it.
Follow-up question to you on this, David. You might be following this closer than I am. I know that South Africa took Israel to one of the international courts on the question of whether they were committing genocide, and that was earlier in the war. And the findings were at the time that they weren't, but there was almost like an issue or a warning to Israel about their aggression into Gaza could lead into that space of genocide. There's currently a new case being heard, right? Is that right? And I don't know who's running that case or where that's been, but I've seen some small reports about that as well, and it seems to be going down the same path of a finding. But I'm not completely across that. Are you aware of this?
I'm not aware of the new one. I think the original case that South Africa took to the International Court of Justice is a really fascinating case study on how these things are distorted and misreported. So South Africa takes this spurious claim to a court stuffed full of UN appointees who loathe Israel as a matter of principle. And their first challenge is to find that they have jurisdiction because Israel is not a signatory to the treaty that empowers the court. Their second challenge is, of course, to argue a case around genocide when the facts don't stack up. Where they conclude is by saying, and to be fair, the court itself has tried to make this clear, but no one listens to it. Where they concluded was by saying that it is jurisdictionally possible that Israel does have to answer that charge in the court. So it is possible the court has jurisdiction. And on the basis of that, newspapers have and commentators have then and since said that Israel stands accused and even convicted of genocide, which is obviously absurd. And, of course, the court proceeded to issue warrants, which allowed everyone to say, well, arresting Sinwar and the other Hamas leaders is a bit academic because they're dead, but everyone's saying that Netanyahu has to be arrested and held as well. So that's, I think, just a stunning example of how these institutions, which were nobly conceived and intended to do good things, are vampired by the states that appoint political animals to lead them and run them and manipulate them, and they're then used not to pursue an independent global legal system, but they're used to pursue statecraft and state policy. And they're now seen for what they are.
Very good. Okay. We're getting towards the end of the episode. We're going to go to category nominations. We don't actually have a lot this week. We have one from Ian Hume for Tory with a typewriter. He said, he wants to nominate Carl Stefanovich for his attempt to be Joe Rogan with his new podcast that, other than the Prime Minister, has featured a parade of cookers, con artists and cretins.
Welcome to the podcast ecosystem.
Yes. I know. It has popped up in my feed a bit, actually. I've not listened to it, but I'm not going to bother. But it's interesting that he's done that. The other one is actually, I'm just going to use the flex category, the extra ballast fan in the bottom of the ballot box. And David, actually, you might be interested in this, and I don't know if you have paid attention to this, but there is actually a significant election going on right now in the Labor movement, and that is the election within the United Workers Union.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And it's coming to a crescendo quite soon. I think the election closes early next month. And for those of you that don't know who the United Workers Union are, they're an amalgamation of two significantly historically big unions, the National Union of Workers, which is the old Storeman and Packers Union, and the United Voice, which is the old LHMU. The
MISOs.
The MISOs, the Liquor Hospitality Miscellaneous Workers Union. Maybe a decade ago, testing my memory there, but these two unions amalgamated, which kind of surprised a lot of us in the union movement. We wouldn't have thought that they were natural industrial allies in terms of the coverage of the workers that they seek to represent, but it was hailed as this is where unionism is going in these big super unions, and they were
historically they were both kind of regarded as centrist unions. The NUW was always a sort of a moderate centrist union in the right. The MISOs were always a powerful moderate union in the left. At the ACTU, they worked closely together, sort of husbanding a sort of a centrist leadership of the ACTU. Kelty relied on them, Hawke relied on them. So there was some history to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember going to actually Australian Progress is on this week, which is like a national conference of sort of progressive campaigners and organisers and people in the NGO space. And I remember going to an Australian Progress conference many years ago when UWU was first created, and the folks from UWU were doing a presentation about this is what a modern union looks like and how they've been so successful. And in my mind, I was sort of thinking, this union looks so big, it looks like the United Nations, and there's like double ups of roles because they couldn't agree on the duplication of roles within the union across all the different state branches. Now it looks like this has been an example of an amalgamation gone horribly wrong, because now they're having an election, and the way that the two tickets are running, it basically is the NUW running against the MISOs. The NUW is running on a members first ticket, and the MISOs or United Voice are running on a United for You ticket. Both are claiming to be the outsiders. the underdog in this election when both actually have got elected representatives on the branch committee of management at a national level. I guess the strengths, if you were to map it strategically, United Voice are strong in everywhere except for Victoria, and the NUW or the members' first ticket are strong in Victoria, and the winner will be the one that can pinch enough votes from the other states. But there's also big implications for the direction of the Labor Party, particularly in states like South Australia and Queensland, because if the members' first ticket wins, which is the old NUW, then they will have control over the votes in the South Australian conference or convention, which normally have been misso votes, and same within Queensland. And you flip that, if the missos were successful, United For You campaign, that would have implications in Victoria because of the votes that the old NUW hold inside the Victorian Left. Having said that, though, the Victorian Left is a very, very big organisation as a faction, and I don't think it'll change the direction. But it'll also have an impact at the national conference as well, because the votes on the floor of national conference will realign as well. I don't know if you've been across this, David, but it's something worth talking about.
Yeah. Obviously, the amalgamation was, a disappointment in my view, because it took the National Union of Workers out of the constellation of the right in the Labor Party, and meant that they effectively became part of the left. So the right in the Labor Party became weaker, the left became consequently stronger, as the amalgamated union was a left-wing union. I think it's too early to proclaim the amalgamation a failure. We've seen lots of unions struggle with these sorts of big amalgamations. Some of them struggled very, very badly, but some of them have had an election like this and then gone on to shake things out and move forward. It's almost been normal, I think, in the Australian experience that when two big unions amalgamate, there are some double ups, there is some duplication as new systems and new leaderships wash through the system, and that might be all this is. It would be, I think you're spot on, like there's the missos tendency versus the NUW tendency. Which one will prevail? It will be a matter of significance no matter which one of them disappears, because they've both been such significant tendencies in the labour movement. So in that sense, it's a climactic battle. But I don't know if its implications beyond that are going to be quite what you say they will be. I mean, in some ways, it's a battle about which left-wing leader will the union end up with. And so the implications might be significant for internal socialist left considerations, but for the broader Labor Party, maybe not so much. I guess my final thought is when the union amalgamated, they did come up with a structure which I thought was, completely unique and unprecedented, where the union was essentially governed by districts. And there were, I think, 151 districts across the country that followed federal electorate guide maps. And being, a creature of my times, I've always struggled to conceptualise anything other than state branches in a national office. So this was a wild departure from that. And so, I was uncomfortable with it because it was a wild departure. But at the same time, I thought, well, both of these tendencies, the missos and the NUW, are known for being, good, effective unionists, organising the unorganised. Maybe this is a model for the future. Maybe it'll work. I hope it does. So it'll be an election to watch for those of us interested in the internecine world of the Labor Party, for sure. And I guess whether it's the missos or the NUW tendency that fades to black, that will be of significance too.
Can I put this to you then? Because in talking to folks outside of Victoria that have got a keen interest in this election, they have said that this is the most significant internal union election in the history of the Australian Labor movement. And I was like,
It just means they're too young to remember the AWU.
I said, that's a pretty big call. We've
had some big ones.
Yeah, and when they said it to me, I had you in mind. I was like, I am going to put that to David on the pod.
No, I mean, they always feel that way because there's they're very close. They're very, they have a lot of significance for institutions we care about, the ACTU, the ALP, trades hall councils. So they feel very significant, and for many people they are very significant. Is this is this bigger than Joe Ludwig versus Bill Ludwig versus Steve Harrison in the AWU? You'd struggle to convince me of that. But I guess that my point really is only we have seen these sorts of titanic fights before, and that means that the current people are forgiven for understanding that it's a titanic struggle.
And the other thing I want to name as well is that union elections are inherently a good thing. Like, a lot of people criticise unions of being out of touch and a plaything for Labor Party apparatchiks and whatnot, but there are very democratic institutions, and could they be more democratic? Absolutely. But I think this is, tension inside an organisation actually is a good thing, because it usually brings out the best in people. And I've been on both the Members First and the United for You websites and read a lot of, what their comms are and what they're offering to members. And it's all eminently good things that will make the union better. So regardless of who wins, if they are to fulfil their promises that they're making to their voters, to the members of the union, then I think it broadly will put the union in a good place in terms of how it can continue to organise and represent working people across those particular industries. So
that's true, but I'd put a caveat on that, and this might be particularly a Victorian thing, but there's always been a very strong cultural aversion in our Labor movement and our Labor Party about external interference in the internal affairs of trade unions. And that arises from the experience of the split and the fact that industrial groups were active inside unions, flipping them away from Communist Party-aligned leaderships. There's a lot of history. But I guess where that finished was with a kind of a behavioural norm established in the labour movement about not interfering in the external affairs of trade unions. However, as trade unions have got larger and larger, it has become less and less realistic to imagine that individual disgruntled members or groups of disgruntled members can muster the wherewithal and the reach to run campaigns in what have become ever larger and more complicated organisations. I don't know what the rules are of this union, for instance, but if you've got to run 151 candidates in 151 districts across the country to form a new leadership, that's, and it may not be that, I don't know the rules, but it's becoming a bigger and bigger undertaking. And as it becomes a bigger undertaking, then it's not just unhappy Boilermaker running against the union secretary. You're starting to talk about how you need to fundraise, you need to find phone canvassing operations, marketing operations, online operations. They become bigger and bigger undertakings, more sophisticated, require more funding. So competition's fundamentally good. It's good that union leaders are not sinecures, but people who understand they have to remain close to their members and hold their confidence. Tick, tick, tick. But let's remain clear-eyed about, how big these elections can be and what they involve.
Indeed. To close out, who's your Social Democrat of the month, David?
I think the Premier of South Australia deserves this one. What a fine campaign. Led a fine and united caucus, disciplined, effective. And as I said earlier, I thought a really wonderful, thoughtful set of remarks on election night. So, I can't say anything other than what Tom Koutson-Tonis said, the Lion of Labor, where I'd trust him with my children, and tonight the people of South Australia have made that same decision.
Indeed. And CB Paul has also nominated Peter Malinauskas for the Social Democrat of the Month. Thanks, Paul. Before we close out, don't forget, so tomorrow is Wednesday. We're recording our final South Australian election recap with Hannah McLeod and Matt Clemo, and that will be up late this week as well. So this is our second week where we're dropping 2 episodes on basically the same day. Sorry to overwhelm you with content, just the way that sort of the election coverage overlapped with the mailbag and with Feeney Files. And then after that, we'll be back on to our regular programming of just dropping 1 episode per week. Jessie had to run off and go to a meeting, so cheerio, Jessie. David, thanks very much for your contributions today.
Thank you very kindly. Nice to see you.
And thanks to everyone else for listening, and have a great week. Hey, Social Democrats, thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.